what I thought I'd do, Claire, if it works for you guys, is just give a bit of an overview on a whole range of topics. We know at the moment there's lots and lots impacting on farmers, whether that be the weather, whether that be the future, whether that be trade deals, Brexit, you name it. It's almost a bit of a perfect storm of issues. But I thought what I'd do, I'll run through them all, and then we can pick up any of those plus anything more in more detail in the questions. But before we do, I think Richard Teal is on the call. I think I saw him, and you mentioned earlier. And I just wanted to say a huge thank you, actually. I get to speak at lots and lots of things, okay? And some of them are better than others. Some of them you enjoy more than others. Some are a bit like pulling teeth at times. And I did a round table with Richard a while ago. And I've got to say, I didn't know what to expect, if I was brutally honest, but it was one of the most enjoyable sessions I've had for a long time, and a wide-ranging discussion with some great people. So I just wanted to really thank Richard for that, and all those. I'm sure there's probably one or two on this call who may well have been on that round table as well. It was I found it fantastic. So look, it goes without saying, I would much rather be sitting with you, having a cup of coffee with you. Claire, you make a great cup of coffee always, but unfortunately we can't. And therefore I thought what I would do is start almost with the reason for why we're having to do what we're doing, and that's COVID. And when I think about agriculture and COVID, I get my mind gets split in a number of different directions. On the one hand, certain sectors of farming, certain farm businesses have been horrifically affected by it. When I think about those who have big diversified businesses, such as wedding venues, for example, or when I think about particular sectors such as those who grow ornamental plants and couldn't put those plants into garden centres for the Easter weekend, or those in the dairy sector for whom they were predominantly supplying into coffee shops and if you like, cafes, and were horrifically affected by COVID. But I then step back and I look at agriculture as a whole, and the reality is actually, when I look at most other sectors of the economy, agriculture has not been affected to a huge extent. I can't think of many occupations I would rather have been doing in the last 7 months than sitting at my farm with my family and kids with a 300-acre garden around me. Doing what we've done. We've just simply put food on people's plates. And there's been some real challenges with COVID, particularly around the supply chain. The fact that there was a real challenge for eggs at one stage. Now, that wasn't because there was a shortage of eggs in the country. We had plenty of eggs. But McDonald's, for example, who are a huge user of eggs, always take white-shelled eggs. And what we as consumers enjoy are brown-shelled eggs. We had the same problem at one stage with cheese. So there wasn't a shortage of cheddar cheese, but the problem is restaurants and cafes and food service sector and manufacturers like cheese in 20-kilo blocks. And unfortunately, not many consumers who then had to do all their food shopping in retail outlets were prepared to buy 20-kilo blocks of cheese. And you couldn't have got many of them on the shelf anyway. Flour was another classic. You know, I remember for weeks, that sort of amateur bake-off contestant in me just could not get hold of any flour. That wasn't because there was a shortage of flour in the country. It's because there was a shortage of machines to put flour in kilo and half-kilo bags. So you could buy flour in a 25-kilo bag, but you couldn't buy it in a kilo bag. So there were some real challenges in that supply chain. But ultimately, farming has stepped up. We've done what we've done, and we've put food on the nation's plates, and I'm immensely proud of that. And interestingly, actually, what we have also seen is a real uplift in people's interest in food and interest in where foods come from. If I look at our farmer favourability survey, which we run every August, we saw a huge increase in people's favourability of farmers. And I think part of that was because of there's nothing like white shelves in a supermarket to remind people about the importance of food. And I think we have all over probably 20, 30, 40 years become slightly casual about thinking about food. It's just there. We don't think about how it gets there. We don't think about all of the people involved in that. But ultimately, I think that that's been really interesting. The other thing with COVID, and probably the thing that, if I think about my own farm, so I farm, for many of you won't know, so I farm in a slightly unique area. I am not a rural farmer on the side of a hill. I am a farmer who farms 24 miles north of Marble Arch, okay? So I am right on the edge of North London. And what I saw, the biggest impact on my farm is I saw a lot more people walking around my farm. And this presented the industry or farming colleagues with a real challenge. So there was a group of farmers who at the start of lockdown basically wanted to do the old farming caricature of get off my land, close the footpaths, we really don't want these people here. The vast majority of farmers took a very different approach, which was actually, this is a huge opportunity. We saw more people on our farms. We saw more people enjoying the countryside. We had more people asking questions about what was happening in a field and where their food was coming from and what was going on. And we really grabbed that opportunity to use that captive audience. Now, yes, there were challenges around people being in the wrong place or acting irresponsibly, or those delightful dog feces that end up being bagged up and put on hedgerows as if they're some sort of Christmas bauble. But actually, what we did see is we saw some fantastic engagement. I had 2,500 people walk through my farm one bank holiday, which is just incredible. I think it's fantastic. And I talked to colleagues of mine, an old school friend of mine actually, who she's a lovely girl, and she lives in a flat. I don't know the location of where all you guys are, but look, given this is a rural group, I doubt any of you are in this location, but there's a block of flats, or a few blocks of flats at the top of Brixton Hill in South London. And this girl lives in one of those flats, and she's got 2 children. She's married to a husband who, if I was being brutally honest, they are only married because they don't get on now, but they're basically married because of the kids. They've stayed married because of the kids. She was locked up in a flat effectively for weeks and weeks on end. And we sometimes don't realize quite how lucky we've got it in some of the locations we are and what we can enjoy. And for me, therefore, anything that farming and farmers and rural communities could do for the urban population and for wider society was something that we really needed to step up to. So that if you like is COVID. I think the other thing for me with COVID is farmers are just human beings. We've been affected in exactly the same way as anyone else has. You know, lots of us are people. You know, I think there's nothing more enjoyable than when I'm in the Stoneleigh office and meeting up with Claire in the farm shop for a cup of coffee and a gossip generally. We've not been able to do that. We've not been able to catch up with each other and see each other and have that normal human interaction. And I think that has had a burden on farming. I think I'll come on later to talk about mental health and well-being, but I think it is having an effect on all of us. The fact we're having to do this call without being able to have that cup of coffee with each other between sessions. And I think it will have a legacy, unfortunately, a negative legacy. But I hope what it'll also do is remind us all about the importance of that people connection. And lots of you guys, the rural chaplains, you know, this is absolutely front and center of your worlds, you know, how we do that human interaction. But what I thought I'd also talk about is a little bit about some of the, if you like, the more political, the more technical changes that are coming up. Agriculture, and if I get my crystal ball out over the next few years, I don't know what the outcomes are going to be, okay? So I can't tell you what agriculture will look like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years' time. What I can tell you is it will be fundamentally different. So the changes that are occurring, the trade deals that will be done, the agriculture bill that had got royal assent on Wednesday, the change in payment regimes, the change in regulatory regimes, the change in what society expects of farming in the countryside. will all manifest themselves in a different agriculture. And all of that change leads to uncertainty, it leads to anxiety, it leads to fear. It also leads to massive opportunities as well. And I think if farmers embrace future opportunities, I think there's a very successful future for our industry, but there will be challenges. Now, the first one of those, and I'm an NFU office holder, okay, so we're a little bit like broken records as NFU office holders at the moment. But the first thing is, how do we make sure that we protect our farmers in this country? So we have some of the best farmers in the world producing some of the highest standard food in the world, to the highest environmental standards, animal welfare standards, food safety standards. We were really, really worried, actually, that we were going to be heavily undermined. Many of you will have heard us speak on this. Many of you will have probably signed the petition. Many of you I know, talking to Richard, I know, have helped lobby to protect those standards. And we were absolutely delighted when fortnight ago now, 10 days ago now, government have agreed to amendments to the trade bill coming up and to the agriculture bill to protect those standards. Now, they'll never go as far as some people would want, but they have gone a lot further than many people feared. And I think we do now have some protections that were not there, and arguably a number of people in government at one extreme, shall we say, did not want there. And I think that's really important, because I think not only do we as farmers need protecting, our consumers and our society have a set of expectations, not just from how farmers operate, but how food chains operate, how the countryside operates. And that would have been totally undermined if we had not got those protections. So look, there's a thank you there for everyone who was one of those million people who signed the petition, everyone who has helped lobby, and it's been really, really invaluable. The next bit I thought I'd touch on is effectively what happens on the 31st of December. Now, I don't know what is going to happen between the 31st of December and the 1st of January, or the reality is everyone's now saying 4th of January because nobody will do anything that weekend anyway. But the on the Monday, we are in a different place. The world will be different. Whatever we end up with, whether we get a deal with Europe or no deal with Europe, there will be friction at the border. There will be different ways of doing things, and that will have impacts. If we have no deal, if we are hit with a circa 50% tariff on our sheep meat, the vast majority of the exports of sheep meat go into continental Europe, that will have an impact in the marketplace. That will have an impact on sheep farmers up and down the country. And I think one of the things that we fear to some extent is that there's probably not been enough honesty about the fact the world is going to be different. I think it has been painted by lots of people that the future is all going to be rosy, it's all going to be positive, everything's going to be great. It may not be. There will be some difficulties. Particular businesses, you know, will be casualties of the changes that happen over the next few years. Now, there will be opportunities for others, as I said. And I think one of the things I almost just wanted to get across to you, and we're trying to do this more and more, is we've all got to prepare for that change. We've all got to be prepared to help the industry through the next few months and years of change, and that's not easy. It's an industry that at its very heart is ultra conservative with a small c. We are very traditional. We have particular caricatures, and change is not something that fits comfortably with many of us. And I think that will throw up some challenges, and we can touch on some of that when we get into questions. The next two or three bits I wanted to touch on are actually, I think, in general, very positive things. The first thing is we, as farmers, and I feel this very heavily at times, we feel as though we are being constantly criticized. Yeah, we're either responsible for killing the planet, or responsible for producing food that's killing people. We're drenching the fields with chemicals. We're ripping up hedgerows. We're generally not very nice people, is how farming gets perceived, or correction, that is the perception that some people get of how farming is perceived. When I actually look at this, when I dig underneath some of this, when I look at and talk to the public, talk to society, when we do our surveys, nothing could be further from the truth, actually. Farmers are generally loved. People generally have a huge respect for farming. And I think it's really important we do a better job at getting that across to farmers, because it can feel pretty beaten up when we're constantly told, stop eating meat and stop keeping livestock, okay? The reality is that there are small minorities in this country who are very vocal around particular issues. And it doesn't matter whether it's a discussion about the countryside or a discussion around diet or whatever it is. But when we talk to the public, when we talk to society, farming is one of those occupations that people either want to be, I think they can't be, but they want to be. And actually have huge respect for. I love having people on the farm, and all of them are fascinated in what I do. Now, I said earlier, I live in 24 miles north of Marble Arch, right? It's a postcode, it's AL5, okay? If anyone ever comes across AL5, it is about the wealthiest postcode in the country, okay? I was very, very lucky. I happened to be born here because I couldn't afford to buy a house here. I was just very lucky. And everyone around here is either a investment banker or a high court judge or a fancy brain surgeon or a banker. So yeah, they've all got great, fancy, sexy professions and make fortunes. Okay, and lots of them their kids go to the same, or the ones that don't go to private school, their kids go to the same school that my kids go to. And every term we get together and we go to the pub and we'll have a bite to eat and a bit. Well, we used to a bite to eat and a beer. And the first time you do this, you always introduce yourself. So I'm Alistair. I'm an investment banker. I invested £10 billion today. I'm a high court judge. I'm doing this, and you go through this. You get to Stuart. I say I'm a farmer. Well, they all know that because they smelt me on the way in. But look, I'm a farmer. Who's the one person everyone wants to talk to the whole night long? It's not the investment banker or the stock, but the high court judge, actually, he can be quite interesting. But the reality is everyone wants to talk to the farmer because we all have this engagement back to farming. 3 times a day, everyone is reminded about farming. And we don't do a good enough job as an industry or as a community or as all those around farming at actually telling ourselves sometimes how highly regarded we are by the rest of society. And when we get 1 million people sign a petition, right? 1 million people, the only petitions that get that scale of support are things like the Gulf War, really big political society issues. We got 1 million people, and it's fantastic, and we need to be way better. And I emphasize this for you guys when talking to farmers. Just remind farmers how supported we are, because actually I genuinely believe we are. And unfortunately, at times we're our worst advert for ourselves because we don't talk about how great we are. We don't talk about our world-leading standards. We don't talk about the fact that actually we produce the iconic landscape that is Britain that people love to see, that tapestry of fields and hedgerows. And just coming on to fields and hedgerows, the next big exciting thing for farming, and it's something that we talked quite a bit about actually on the call with the round table that Richard hosted, is our aspirations for net zero. Now, 2 years ago, we set out to commit the industry to an aspiration to get to net zero by 2040. There are a number of those in the farming community who at the time thought we were absolutely mad. Okay, why on earth do we want to do this? Okay, and there's a number of reasons we wanted to do it. The first one is because it's pure and simply the right thing. The biggest issue we all face at the moment is climate change. And actually, the people who see it first in this country, there are others around the world who see it before we do, but the people who are exposed to it first are farmers. We are the ones who experience droughts and floods with ever greater frequency and ever greater extreme. So it's the right thing. We need to do it. The second thing is it actually makes financial sense. I almost feel ashamed of saying that. You know, how can climate change make financial sense? Well, actually, lots of the solutions to climate change are about becoming more efficient, about using your resources more wisely, about being more productive. Well, actually, those are the things that also deliver economic benefits to farming. And it's a fantastic sort of sweet spot, if you like, where we could improve our economic lot, but at the same thing, address that big issue that we need to address. And the final two, the first one of the final two is because I think society expects us to do it. I think if we are to keep that support for farmers, if we are to keep ourselves as a relevant industry in the 21st century, we need to address the things that worry society. We are part of society and we need to be part of that solution, because if not, I think actually there is a school of thought that eventually we may even effectively lose that general license to farm the countryside if we're not addressing the big issues of society. And the final one is we have a massive advantage over every other sector of the economy. So every sector of the economy has a carbon footprint. Everything we do as human beings has a carbon footprint. You know, sitting on this call creates carbon emissions. Okay, I'm sat in quite a warm office. I think and the insulation's not great, so my emissions aren't brilliant this morning. But the reality is everything we do creates emissions. But farming is one of the very few industries that can also reduce emissions and sequester carbon. So when we have these discussions about grassland and livestock, and I've debated this with one or two of you before, we also have an opportunity in our grasslands to store carbon, to lock up carbon, to sequester carbon, to take carbon out of the atmosphere. There aren't many other industries that have such a great competitive advantage, and which is why I actually get so excited about net zero going forward. I get worried about climate change, what we've seen recently in terms of much greater droughts, floods, cold, hot. That's having impacts on farms. It's the thing that farmers talk to me more about. You know, forget Brexit, forget COVID. The reality is it's wet and cold and I've not been able to get my grain in. But actually, that's ultimately comes back to climate change, and that will be probably the big thing that affects agriculture going forward. But also for the opportunity. I talk about floods, and lots of the time I talk a lot about water. We've had some horrendous floods in this country. I was stood in Lincolnshire not so long ago. It would have been thick end of a year ago, I think now. And I was stood out looking at a farmer who was under 6 feet of water. At the same time, we'd got an internal drainage board that had pumped 8 million cubic meters of fresh water into the North Sea in the previous 3 days. Not far from there, I'd got some horticulture growers who were suffering with a drought and who were having their abstraction licenses cut. One of the things we've got in this country is fresh water, and I think it's a huge opportunity. If I look at fruit and veg, for example, big opportunities in years to come. We're massively under self-sufficient on fruit and veg. Actually, if we can get water right on the back of climate change, I'd much rather be growing fruit and veg here than in California or in Spain or somewhere else where they just don't have water. They don't have water at times for human beings, let alone for almonds or for grapes or citrus fruit or whatever else it happens to be. Now, I've already gone over time, Claire, but I'm going to do 2 more quick things if it's all right with you, and I will have time for questions, I promise. And the last 2 things I'm asking for, certainly the first one, I'm asking for your help. So I love farming. It is one of the, it is the best industry, the best community to be in. I would do nothing else. But there's one part of farming I am massively, massively ashamed of. And that's our health and safety record. Since the start of lockdown, so since March, we have had 30 fatalities on British farms. 30 fatalities. We have had children under 10 killed on farms this year. We've had members of the public killed on farms. And we all know what are the things that kill people, okay? 5 occasions this year we've had deaths associated with quad bike helmets and not quad bikes, and on no occasions was anyone wearing a helmet. So when you're out and about seeing farmers, meeting farmers, can you please remind them about the importance of us not killing each other? It is something everyone needs to take ownership of. And if you see someone on a quad bike without a helmet, can you please point it out? Too often we're all frightened, and I've been like this, we're frightened to point out problems and unsafe situations, but we've all got to take ownership, and we've all got to be not embarrassed or shy of pointing it out. So that's a request. And the last one, and it's something I talk a little bit about these days. I never used to, because I'm probably, I'm not sure if this is right, I'm possibly the caricature of a British farmer, okay? I know I'm not. I'm a bit younger than the caricature of a British farmer, but I'm not far off it, right? I'm a big, butch, macho bloke, right? I don't have worries or anxieties or fears or concerns or any of that stuff, okay? I'm fine. Whenever anyone asks me, I'm fine. And actually, farmers are going to go through some really tough times going forward, some real times of change. Now, big opportunities as well, but times of change and uncertainty. And I really fear about mental health in farming. It's something we've started to talk about in the last few years in a way that if an NFU office holder 10 years ago had talked about mental health, they wouldn't have been an NFU office holder for very long. But the reality is now we are talking about it. We've all got permission to talk about it. And one of the things I love most about farming is not that we're a great, and I'll do a sales pitch on our sector of the economy with the foundations of £120 billion food industry and all the rest of that, right? That's really good stuff. The most exciting, fun, proud bit I am of farming is we're not a sector of the economy, guys, okay? We're a community. We're a rural community. And what do communities do? They look after each other. They care for each other. They look out for each other. And I know you guys do this probably better than anyone, day in, day out. And I just want you to do more of it, because people like me and farmers like me are going to need to look out for our well-being going forward. And it's really important that everyone supports us doing that. And I've now run massively over time, Claire, but hopefully I have left enough time for a few questions. And thank you for giving me the opportunity.